He would come in with Peanuts cartoons that inspired a sermon. He'd come in with clippings from Time or Newsweek or a joke or all this or that. At one time he brought in a squash and a piece of wood and a hammer, and he put them down, and he took the hammer and he banged on the squash, and it split into a million pieces. And then he took the hammer and he banged on the wood, nothing happened. Banged on the wood, nothing happened. And then he did a whole sermon about how things that grow quickly and fast and flashy, like a squash, are often more easily destroyed than that which takes a long time to grow, like wood or tradition or faith. And, you know, and I mean, when you see somebody banging with a hammer, you're paying attention. And I think that's a wonderful way of expressing your faith without necessarily having to do it in a constricted.
Well, what was the most meaningful thing you got out of that 8 years of experience? At one time, in just a couple of paragraphs, he described happiness.
Yeah, I'd say that was one of them. We were in a hospital, and he had suffered a stroke, and we were visiting, and we were talking about happiness and what made people happy and all the things that we want to have to get happiness. And we heard a baby crying out in the hallway. He said, "Well, do you hear that baby?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Do you know, our sages say when babies come into the world, their fists are clenched like this, right?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "That's because babies don't know any better, and they think when they come into the world, they're going to be able to take everything. But look at me," he said, "and how I'm an old man and I'm going to die soon. And how am I going to die?" And he opened his hands like this. And I just looked at his hands. He said, "That's because at the end you realize you can't take anything with you." And we sat there for a minute, and I said, "So have we figured out the secret of happiness?" And he said, "Yes, we have." I said, "Are you going to tell me?" And he said, "Yes. Are you ready?" I said, "I'm ready." "Be satisfied." "That's it?" I said. "Be grateful." "That's it? For all you have and all God has given you." "That's it?" "That's it." And in that little exchange,
wow,
I've never been able since to find any flaw in that in terms of really what you need to make you happy. If you actually follow that, you can be happy in this world. If you're always trying to do this,
yeah,
you're going to always realize it's going to fall out of your hands sooner or later.
Is that the common ground that you found between the Reb and Henry?
Yes, but not in the typical way that you would find it. In other words, common ground, not because they both studied the same way and came to the same conclusion.
Which they did not.
Point of fact, they could not have had more different paths. The Reb was always an upstanding citizen, a pious man, a righteous man, all the way till his 90th birthday. Henry was born into poverty in one of the worst sections in Brooklyn, one of 7 kids, so poor that they used to put big pots of rice on the kitchen counter so that the rats would jump into the rice at night and not come into the bedrooms and bite him. And he literally, his whole childhood, his sleep was uneasy because he was always afraid that a rodent would be chewing on him. And he was a criminal by the time he was a teenager. He dropped out of school early. He was incarcerated. When he was 19, he became a drug dealer and then a drug addict. And shortly after his 30th birthday, he was so low and had lost everything. He'd once made $500,000 a year selling drugs, all gone because of his habit. And the only people he could think of to rob were his own drug dealers, which is never a good idea. And he robs them, and then he goes home and he's getting high, and all of a sudden he has this revelation that, uh-oh, they know where I live.
Yeah.
And so he goes out in front of his house with a shotgun, lies on the ground with a shotgun behind a row of trash cans, tells his wife and his baby daughter, you know, hide, turn off the lights, all this kind of thing. And on the ground with the shotgun, certain that the next car that's going to come around the corner is going to be containing his murderers and a spray of bullets, and he's dead. He does what, you know, people do in moments like that. You know, Jesus, get me out of this. And he said, if you get me through this night, you can have me in the morning. Miraculously, he gets through that night. The sun comes up. It's Easter morning of all mornings. He crawls into his bed. His wife is crying. He says to her, "Let me ask you a question. What's keeping you from going to God?" And she looks at him through tears and she says, "You are." And he realized the effect that this lifestyle he had, not just on him, but on his wife, his child. And he drank a bottle of NyQuil and knocked himself out for a day, and another one, and he began this detox and began this slow climb back. And 20 years later, I encounter him now in Detroit a guy who once made $500,000 a year in selling drugs, working without a salary in one of the poorest churches I've ever seen with a hole in its roof, running a homeless program where 80 to 100 people sleep at night on the floor of this church. So yes, did he come to the conclusion, be grateful, be satisfied for what God's given you and all you have? Yes.
And
did
give
he
back?
Yes, but did he come to it the same path as the Reb? Not even close. And that's what was so fascinating, because these people, as you pointed out, couldn't be more different. But when they kind of chose that faith would be their guidepost, they became remarkably similar.
But the juxtaposition of this, I think, is very interesting. These two people in your life. One was a rabbi, Orthodox rabbi, who would not have accepted the Messiah that Henry had accepted.
Right.
And yet they both came to the same conclusion. But if you would, there was not a lot in terms of the intensity of their faith they had in common. Would you say?
Intensity.
Because here you have Henry, who would say, my life has been changed by Christ. You have the rabbi who would say, my life has been changed by God. So you had almost a juxtaposition there of two spiritual experiences, incredibly intense, and yet they had so much in common.
Well, because what they did with their faith and their lives being changed, they turned it outward. And they said, now I'm going to create a community. I'm going to help the people in my community. And I have to be honest with you, I had been pretty cynical about faith 10 years ago. You know, you wouldn't have had a chance of me and you sitting at this program 10 years ago, because I had walked away from all my religious training and had started to focus on a lot of the cynical things that are easily found about religion: church scandals, ethnic cleansing wars, all the things that are done in the name of religion that aren't really religious and aren't really faithful. But it was by seeing these two men do small things for their community and their congregation that I lost that cynicism. It was seeing the Reb, 90 years old, long since retired, interrupt our conversation, say, wait, and go through a little phone book he had with scribblings in it and pick up a phone and dial one number. It took him 20 minutes to dial this number, and he would call an old member of the congregation just to see how he was doing. Are we going to see you in services this weekend? You know, make sure you're a part, keeping him a part of what he called the sacred community that was his congregation, even though he'd long since been retired. He wasn't, because it was important for him. Or seeing Henry at midnight in the wintertime when it was 30 degrees inside this church, sitting on a little balcony overlooking 80 homeless men, lumps under blankets. Literally, that's what they looked like, just lumps under blankets. He didn't have to be there. He could have gotten somebody else to do it, but he wanted to make sure that they were safe. 11 o'clock at night, 12 o'clock at night, 1 o'clock in the morning. This kind of goodness, this kind of looking out for your fellow man, without any headlines, without any attention, is to me the purest kind of act of faith. You know, it's hope. It's believing that things can get better and believing that you're sharing something important with your congregation, and they had that.